So let's talk about chapter 4 of the book Karma. The topic of chapter 4 is the great karmic warehouse. Let's first talk about sutras. However profound it is, everything that comes from memory spells karmic bondage. First point is categories of consequence. Categories of consequence. In the previous chapter, we looked at the 8 membranes of memory, 4 of which are collective and 4 of which are individual. However, the yogic system not leads us deeper into an exploration of individual karmic. If you find yourself overwhelmed by the classification that follow, do not get disheartened. As a reader, you do not have to remember these categories in order to decode karma. It would certainly be easy to dispense this with these classifications to make a karma book a simpler, breezier read. But if I include them, it is to reveal the incredible intellectual precision and sophistication of which the ancient yogis and sages were capable. Even if you were to simply read these categories without making any attempt to remember them, you would have a deeper and richer understanding of the subject. The working of karma are complex, but the classification is a simple one. Let us look at let's let us took a look at 4 essential categories of karma or consequence. Behind every individual is one vast storehouse of karma, the sum total of accumulated memory, in Sanskrit termed sanchita. For our purpose, let us simply call it accumulated karma. This is like a great warehouse in which all 8 types of memory are contained: elemental, atomic, evolutionary, genetic, individual karmic, sensory, articulate, and inarticulate. We carry this enormous volume of information with us all the time. The quantity might vary, but every human being carries this phenomenal karmic inheritance. Now, within this vast storehouse of accumulated memory, there is an important dimension called allotted karma. This is in turn contains 2 aspects. Let us call them actionable karma in present and actionable karma in the future. Let us look at what these terms imply. From the vast storehouse of Sanchita, a segment of memory ripens. It surfaces and comes to the face, demanding immediate attention. This is your allotted karma. Every human being has a certain allotment of karma for a lifetime, called prarabdha karma in the Indian tradition. It is the karma that needs to be handled now. The rest continue to remain latent and unripe in the vast storehouse of accumulated memory. So your current lifetime is a certain allotment of karma, a distinct amount of memory playing itself out. The nature of this allotment varies from a person to person. For each person, the life energy works differently. For each person has a different percentage of energy dedicated to physical activity, a different percentage to intellectual activity, a different percentage to emotional activity, a different percentage to energy activity, and a different percentage to the capacity for meditativeness or inner stillness. The nature of a person's allotment is actually visible at an early age. Parents can see it clearly in 2 children. One may have a certain propensity for physical activity while the other may be quieter. These differences are sometimes even subtly visible in newborn infants in a hospital maternity ward. Later, of course, differences grow because the type of the environment and the child grows up in, the food they eat, the type of attitudes they develop. But very early differences are determined by the nature of each child's allotted karma. Now, every spiritual process is essentially about digging into the storehouse of accumulated karma. Spiritual practitioners are people in a hurry. They want to dig as much as possible and work it out rather than wait for each allotment to ripen in its own time. This is why so much of the spiritual process is action oriented. Spiritual seekers want to handle 10 lifetimes of karma in a single lifetime if they can. The spiritual journey also teaches them to avoid accumulating new karma and to limit the consequences of their allotted karma. In this manner, they work through large karmic volumes at a great speed. How does one feel when one has emptied out one's allotted karma? Usually, life grows more relaxed, less reactive, less compulsive. Strong likes and dislikes, whether about people, places, food, work, or politics, begin to weaken. Comfort zones become less important. Initially, you may find you want to slow down and live quietly. After that, you will choose to engage with the world again, but this time it will be in wonderfully conscious way. Your life is now full of choices. We now come to another aspect of allotted karma. We now come to another aspect of allotted karma. This is actionable karma in the present, kriyamana karma, or karma that compels outward action. We cannot resist its power. There are many impulses and propensities in a human being, but not all of them propel us to external action. However, every individual carries another type of karma that must be acted upon externally. The rest can be handled internally. How you handle your externally actionable karma in present is significant because it creates consequences for the future. When some trigger compels action, how consciously you perform that action becomes important. If you do it unconsciously, that unconsciousness will generate an enormous amount of karma, and that is how karma perpetuates itself. Take the human population as an example. The moment two people act, you have consequences. A man and a woman get together and may produce a child. This is a simple physical example of how actions breed consequences. But the consequences can be on many levels in terms of thoughts, emotions, ideas, opinions, and actions. Here is where the idea of good karma becomes important. You can alter your future simply by performing the right kind of action in the present. You can transform your future without any spiritual process, without any elevation in consequences. When you perform the right actions today, a positive future is assured. But if you become meditative, you go a step further. Every spiritual tradition has encouraged people to meditate for this reason. When you become meditative, you do not merely create positive karma, you stop breeding karma altogether. In all spiritual tradition, to become an ascetic means just this: you stop breeding karmic consequences. Let me offer a personal example. As a guru, when I am conducting a spiritual program, I am in a particular mood. If I embrace everyone before me with the tears of joy and inclusiveness, it will not breed any karmic consequences. But if I do the same thing only with one person whom I know well, that same embrace will create consequences. This is because the inclusive embrace has no karmic substance to it. It is absolutely conscious action. This is why at a program I never focus on the faces I know well. If I choose to meet another's gaze, I always pick a totally unknown face to address. As soon as you focus on someone you know and talk to them, it can turn into an entangling process. It would breed consequences for them, for me, and for the entire situation. However, if I am developing a project, I do of course talk to intimate group of people I know. This will not breed any entangling consequences for them because what we are evolving is not about them or me, but about a larger vision. This is not entanglement because it is an all inclusive involvement. There is nothing selective about it. Look at it this way: if your actions are coming from memory, they will most certainly breed karma. We always say, therefore, that all human actions can be only of two kinds: those that can destroy karma, karma nasta, and those that can breed karma, karma vriddhi. As a guru, my business is to impart the technologies that promote the former. Karma, former, that means karma nasa. So, how you handle your actionable karma in the present is very important. If you are not conscious about it, You may think you are being spiritual, but you may simply be is- spiraling into entanglement. In modern day terminology, you could see the unconscious mind as accumulated karma, sanchita, the subconscious mind as allotted karma, prarabdha, and your conscious mind as actionable karma in present, kriyamana. This is not entirely accurate, but in its most broad terms, it is a useful way to understand the differences. We now come to the other aspect of allotted karma. This is actionable karma in future, agami karma. Your unconscious action today, in terms of thought, emotion, or action, will lead to consequences that compel your action tomorrow or a year later, or some would say even a lifetime later. In other words, no matter what you do, life will drive you into a place where you have to act. If you borrow from a bank, for instance, or have a mortgage, your karma of tomorrow is determined by today's action. Similarly, if you have a child, you are committing yourself to at least a 20-year project. You have to think about providing for the child, sending them to school, putting them through colleges, ensuring that they stand on their own feet. What you do or do not do tomorrow is not decided by a whim. A simple action breeds enormous consequences. It is actionable karma in the future that perpetuates the human cycle of compulsive action, leading to what the Indian spiritual traditions see as cycles of birth and death. It propels human beings to return to the embodied state time and again in order to work out their karmic inheritance. If you found the idea of future lifetimes problematic, do not be distracted by it at this stage. Nor is it essential to an understanding of karma. For the true yogi, there is just one life. Yesterday, you may have been dressed in one way, and today you may be dressed in another. Life, however, stays unchanged. If you handle your actionable karma in the present consciously, you will not breed any compulsive actionable karma in the future. That is the key to handling memory. Let me stress that there is nothing wrong with a bank loan, a mortgage, or a family. Indeed, the more complex your karmic memory is, the more varied and interesting your life becomes. But the aim is to enjoy the process of life, not be trapped by it. Hence, the importance of eliminating all manner of unconscious karma. You do not want to accumulate any karma that will compel you to act compulsively in the future. To continue with the earlier analogy, when conducting a program, I embrace everyone inclusively and choicelessly. I do not choose to favor one over the other. If I were selective, the spiritual transmission would not be as effective. It is the choicelessness of my action that makes it impactful. The karmic trap is always in the choosing. Choice is the great human gift. Freedom is the great human possibility. However, instead of choosing inclusively, most human beings choose selectively. Most choose on the basis of compulsive likes and dislikes, on the basis of attraction and aversion. But when your involvement is absolute, that is inclusive. You are not operating out of past memory. This means there is no compulsion, no consequence, no entanglement, no choice, no friend, no foe. When you perform actionable karma in the present like this, you breed no actionable karma in the future whatsoever. On the other hand, if you choose to involve yourself selectively based on the past memory, the consequence lives with you. You are breeding more memory, whether physical, emotional, or intellectual. You are creating karma that will compel you into situations where you have to act in the future. Once you understand how the karmic mechanism works, you know a basic difference between involvement and entanglement. Most people do not understand the fact that it is possible to be absolutely involved without getting entangled. For instance, whether I meet a stranger or a friend, my interiority remains the same. My involvement is total. I may communicate and act differently, but internally I remain the same. My way of being remains unchanged, although what I do or say is relevant to the situation and the person. This breeds no karma. When involvement is selective, you fall into the trap of entanglement. Here is the central problem. Selective involvement leads to suffering and karma. Detachment leads to lifelessness. But involvement need not come from a place of memory. It can be conscious. For most people, involvement springs from memory and is compulsive. Once memory enters, action is enslaving. Without memory, however, you can operate consciously. When your action is unsullied by past impressions, it is liberating. Next point is from being to doing to having. The human equation was always meant to be like this, to move from being to doing to having. This means we were never meant to act in order to find fulfillment. Fulfillment was seen as an inner condition, it could not be pursued externally. We act in order to express our fulfillment, not to acquire it. We act in order to celebrate our inner completeness, not to pursue it. For most people, however, this simple equation is reversed. Most people do in order to be. They act because they feel incomplete. Their action is prompted by a desire to acquire something or to enhance their identity in some way. This is ancient hunter-gatherer impulsive, which still endures in human being. It is the need to act in order to accumulate, whether it is physical, emotional, or intellectual satisfaction. It is action impelled by a desire to augment themselves, to become more than what they are. They act in order to have, they have in order to be. This is tragic. Most people have already determined what they want to have. Therefore, their doing is invariably to acquire something. Someone wants to earn fame, so they might get into the movies or write a book, for instance. Their identity is now a film star, an author. They identify with this label. It now determines their being. Similarly, someone else wants to acquire the status of sportsman or politician or businessman. People even go around calling themselves golfers. I play golf and write books and ride motorcycles, but I am not a golfer, an author, or a biker. I am not doing in order to acquire an identity. The way I am is untouched by what I do. I am not a yogi because I teach yoga. It is not my activity that makes me a yogi. It is my being that makes me a yogi. Yogi is a description of my inner condition, not my activity. When you live like this, who you are always communicate itself in its own subtle way to people. The fragrance of who you are always gets conveyed. People sense that I am operating from this place of inner freedom even if they do not understand how it works. Very young people come up to me and treat me like their contemporary or even their close friend. They call me Sadguru, but it is not a term of distant reverence. It is one of familiarity of affection. Now, if my talks were about quoting from a scripture, such friendship and affection would be impossible. Scriptures means memory, memory means hierarchy. This hierarchy turns one thing into sacred, another into filthy. What we consider sacred become an authority. What comes from the authority becomes our truth. And this kind of truth renders us incapable, paradoxically, of ever experiencing real truth. We have reached a point today where authority has become the truth. But soon as we turn inward, we realize that truth is the only authority. However profound it is, all that comes from memory spells, karmic bondage. I do not come from a place of karma, so I do not breed karma. It is as simple as that. What I say comes from inner experiences, from a state of knowing, not from previously acquired knowledge. This is chitta, content-less intelligence. The one thing that human beings simultaneously suffer and cherish is memory. You try to acquire and freeze memory in order to acquire an identity. You are trying therefore to do in order to be, but neither your identify nor your memory is essentially about you. But neither your identity nor your memory is essentially about you. Think about it. When you are sitting in a cafe drinking your cappuccino, you can enjoy only your $4 worth of coffee. Whether you have $10 billion in the bank is irrelevant. The money exists only in your memory. To carry money around in your memory means you are a creature of the past. If you base your future on your past, you are as good as dead. And this is why faces around us are becoming so grave. The grave is, after all, the abode of the past. and that is karma too, a habitat of the past. Your actionable karma in the future ensure that your future is exactly like your past. When nothing new happens to you, it is time to rest in peace. Next point is the causes of unease and disease. Allotted karma in most human beings have its own level of complexity. A large part of it is devoted to physical action. Other segments are devoted to thought, emotion, and meditativeness. The problem of modern life is that most people's physical and emotional energy does not find full expression in a lifetime. People in civilized society carry a great deal of unexpressed emotion within. Now if emotions never find full expression, the energy can turn around and become deeply damaging to one's health and well-being. This amounts for the upswing of depression and mental illness across the world. It is said that one of every five Americans suffers from some form of psychological illness in a given year, and 50% will suffer alignment, a mental ailment at some point in their lives. A staggering statistic. The problem is that civilized society regards the unhe- uninhabited expression of emotion as a sign of weakness or a lack of sophistication. The suppression can create untold havoc in the human system. I would say 90% of the people in the world never find full expression of their emotion. They can afraid of their love, their joy, their grief, everything. To laugh loudly is a problem. It is seen as a non-gentle or unladylike. To cry loudly is a problem. It is seen as unrefined and indecorous. We have set up a deeply restrictive culture of for ourselves. Now, the major portion of your allotted karma is devoted to physical activity. The body remains the major source of identification for most people even today. So, though the ratio varies from person to person, 95% of the time allotted karma is oriented towards external action. However, the level of activity in modern life has decreased drastically because people do not use their body the way they used to. If this unused energy remains dormant in the system, it could easily cause disease. The modern mind is going through a unique kind of neurosis for this reason. When you involve yourself intensely in physical activity, you expend a great deal of nervous energy. But now that human beings have become so inactive, almost every person suffers from some kind of anxiety or unease. This is simply because of trapped physical energy. In comparison, you will find that those committed to some form of intense physical exercise are often at a different level of balance and peace and much less entangled in sexuality and other physical drives. This is because one aspect of the person has found full expression. One fallout, one fallout of inactivity is disease. Trapped energy can also cause physical restlessness and agitation, which accounts for the state of chronic unease and disquiet that plague the modern individual. You will notice that the very way people sit and stand reveal the absence of ease. They may have brought a practice gracefulness to their movements, but the unease remains. If you take away the unease in your movement, it shifts inward to another dimension where it is easy for it to find expression. In other words, it will build into your energy. In time, this disquiet on the level of energy manifests as disease. In the Isa Yoga Center, many seekers are put into such intense state of activity that one might wonder why those on the spiritual path are working 20 hours a day. In popular perception, spirituality means someone half dozing under a tree. This is far from truth. The intense physical work at ISA is an integral part of the spiritual journey. I want these people to finish all their allotted karma in a certain period of time. It is impossible to perform physical activity without your thought, emotion, and energies being involved. The same activity can, of course, be performed with different levels of involvement. Those who work only for a livelihood often feel constrained and suffocated. But when you are deeply involved in your work on every level, you will find activity invigorates invigorates you. It does not exhaust you. Invigorates means feel complete. Once you expend this karma, there will be no need for compulsive action. After this, action will be by choice. When the allotted karma has been worked out, you can ask a person to simply sit still and there will be no struggle. The body will comply effortlessly. In the higher level ESA programs, we put people through immense body breaking activity so that afterward they are able to sit without moving. Meditation now happens naturally. When energy allotted for physical activity remains unused in the system, you cannot meditate because the energy will make you restless and ill at ease. Because the energy will make you restless and ill at ease. There are certainly other aspects of disease, environmental factors as well as karmic regions. From genetic factor to personal karmic regions play a part in why energy functions in a certain way and causes disease. However, many people are ill because they are not handling their allotted karma sensibly. One aspect of energy being used is to considerable extent in today's world is mental energy. However, the overuse of mental energy leads to lopsided development and the invariable advent of disease. Consider a country's national budget. A certain amount is allocated for education, a certain budget for industry, a certain percentage for agriculture, development, defense, and so on. But if all these are not being expended, the economy suffers. The same happens within the body. Those who have led a complete life often reach a certain natural state of peace and balance when they age. As the allotted karma starts winding down, you may notice changes in elderly people. You may find that their sleep quota comes down, and when they do sleep, you might find that they sleep deeply. This could be a sign that the allotted karma is drawing to an end. The great karmic warehouse remains, but one installment has begun drawing to its close. The word of caution. This flip does not necessarily mean the end of allotted karma, but in the elderly it could be one of the possible indications. When one installment of karma is over, the inner turmoil recedes and new serenity and equipoise descends. Some accomplished practitioners may go beyond their allotted karma. This could give them a certain aura of peace, but they have still not transcended their accumulated karma. They have moved from a retail shop to the warehouse, but they still have plenty of karma in stock. For the spiritual seeker, allotted karma can be seen as cream on the milk. It is the karma that has surfaced in its lifetime. If you boil the milk well, the cream can further increase. So, the spiritual process is a way of cooking oneself sufficiently to pick up as much karma from your karmic warehouse as possible in this lifetime and deal with it while you are conscious and able bodied. The goal for every freedom seeker is the same, to attend to your karma now rather than wait for life to at throw it at you. Okay, the goal for every freedom seeker is the same, to attend to your karma now rather than wait for life to throw it at you. Let's talk about important sadhana related to this chapter. If you are experiencing deep emotional stress, a simple practice is to remain as far as possible in a posture where your spine is erect. The lumbar region in particular needs to be relaxed and stretched to activate the spine. If you are able to squat for lengths of time, this is particularly beneficial because the extension of the spine has a profound impact on psychological well-being. A natural upsurge of energy will happen if you keep your feet together when you squat, but not many people can do this. So the next best option is to widen the distance between the feet when you squat, keeping your feet in line with your shoulder. Make sure your feet are firmly upon the ground. This is not just an exercise. The spine is not merely a collection of bones, it is the very basis of communication and perception within the human system. Keeping it in optimal condition will not just revitalize and rejuvenate the body but will make a phenomenal difference in your mental and emotional life and the way you function. There is a more comprehensive 7 step practice called the Yoga Namaskara, which is offered free of charge on the Sadhguru app, isa.sadhguru.org/app. This is a powerful process of activating and strengthening the spine and the muscle alongside it. So, as one ages, the spine system does not collapse and the nerves are not pinched. If there is already spinal damage, this is a very good way to regenerate the spine and ensure all around benefits for the entire body. This is also a more scientific approach to unblocking emotional impasses in the human system and promoting what we call Chitta Vritti Nirodha, the liberation of consciousness from fluctuations and bottlenecks. So, this is the end of this chapter. I hope you learned something out of it, you perceive something out of it, and gain a perspective out of it. So, keep learning, keep growing. Thank you. Namaskaram.